So you have this tenant and they haven't been making you their rent payment for the past month, 2 months, maybe even the past year. How ridiculous is that? And you're considering a cash for keys where you give them money to move out of your property and wish them well. That may not seem like a right decision, but it's all about making a good decision, business decision, not an emotional decision. My name is Troy Funk. I'm a licensed real estate broker in the state of Florida. I have been in the business going on 35 years. And in that time, I have handled hundreds of cash for keys. And I'm here today to be a resource to you. And if I am helpful, I ask that you hit that like button and certainly hit the subscribe button. But full disclosure, I am not an attorney. I'm not here to give you legal advice. I'm here to talk to you, landlord to landlord, about best practices to consider and discuss with your attorney if you have legal questions. So let's talk about cash for keys versus eviction. What is the right answer? Well, it all depends. It depends on the circumstance. Now, you have to evaluate every situation differently because ideally you're making a business decision here, not an emotional one. And I know the emotional side of you may say, okay, you haven't been making rent payments for the past year, you've destroyed my property, and I'm supposed to give you cash and wish you well. Emotionally, that doesn't feel right, right? Well, from a business standpoint, let's look at it from a different way of processing that. The benefits, number one, for a cash for keys is time. Ideally, this whole eviction moratorium idea is a mess, right? We're not sure. In some cases, this may extend on. It depends on where you're at. And time is a big factor because time is money. In a cash for keys, ideally, you can resolve the issue sooner than later and get possession of your property back. So time's a big factor. Uh, Another big factor is just money, the expense. If you can get a possession of your property back for less than what's owed, or less than what it would cost to do an eviction, that makes sense. That's just a good business decision. But another real key benefit to doing a cash for keys is just that you can predict the outcome, or you can control the outcome a little better than you can if you do an eviction. See, on a cash for keys, you state to the tenant, look, part of the condition is you're going to give me the possession of my property back on this date, and you're going to leave it broom swept. You're going to leave it in good order. You're not going to leave any of your precious belongings behind, or any junk for that matter, or your animals or your pets. I don't have to deal with any of that. I know as a landlord, if you've been in this business for some time, you've probably seen some pretty ugly situations. With a cash for keys, you can kind of predict how you're going to get your property back. So in the long run, it might be cheaper to do that. So why wouldn't you do a cash for keys? What would be the downside to that? Well, you have to look at the scenario. Let's just say that your tenant has financial means and you know that, look, they haven't been paying me for some time, but these people have resources. They have assets of some sort. And if I do a cash for keys, I'm pretty much just giving that right up, right? I'm giving the option of coming after them for uh, all the damage and all the money that they've cost me. Well, uh, we had a property in the family, a rental property, and there was a young man that wanted to rent it, but he didn't have a very good track record. And we said, in order to rent it, you're going to have a family member co-sign on the lease. Well, he did that, and the young man left. He stopped making rent payments. He left the house in bad shape, and it was very easy. We just had to go to his family member that co-signed on the lease and said, yes, I know you weren't in possession of the property, but you're on the lease. And legally, you're obligated for all the back rent and the damages, and we can go to court or you can write us a check. And his mom wrote us a check. So, that scenario, no, cash for keys would not make sense. But let's just be honest. In most cases, tenants don't have anything. Yes, you may be entitled to get a garnishment or sue them for damages. But if you can't collect, if they have no assets, is it worth it? That's a business decision you have to evaluate. And if it's not, then you take the write off and you move forward. What's the best plan moving forward? So, again, it's a case by case, but cash for keys could be a good solution to move forward. It gives you your property back. So, let's just talk about the basics of a cash for keys. Now, understand this could be a hostile, little bit, I don't know, hostile. Maybe it is hostile, but it might be a frustrating situation because you're in an adverse situation. You're as a landlord, you're frustrated. Your tenant, they're feeling frustration. They're in a process where they're going to have to move out. They're blaming you, and now you're supposed to negotiate with these people for a cash for keys. That might be problematic. So it's always good to have a negotiator between you and your tenant, somebody that's had experience in handling cash for keys for other homeowners that has been successful at that process. Now, ideally, if you're going to sell the property after you evict the tenant, it may seem wise to hire a real estate professional that has experience with cash for keys, either having worked with banks and handling the sale of their bank-owned properties and doing cash for keys, or maybe a real estate agent that has property management experience that has also worked with cash for keys and has been successful. Make that an obligation to them to receive that listing. That's part of their listing commission. And the sooner they can get that tenant out, the sooner they have a sellable listing to put on the market. So obviously a good time to sell right now in our marketplace, but it's a way to kind of circumvent the frustrations of you being liable for doing the cash for keys. So let's just say, no, that's not the option. We're not going to sell the property. We don't we're going to need to do this ourselves. Well, yes, as a landlord, you can do it yourself. You can talk to your attorney and see if they can handle a cash for keys with your tenant. And here are the basic idea, the rules. Number one, and contact your tenant over the phone or have your negotiator contact the tenant and make them an offer to move. And typically, my offer has always been about half of what it's going to cost to do an eviction. So when I evaluate that cost, I cut that in half and I offer that. And I may negotiate up to what it would cost to do an eviction. And I'm flexible. Again, there is no groundwork on what you offer a tenant. It's an amount that you offer them that they agree. But let's just say the tenant's unreasonable and says, no, 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 I won't do a cash for keys unless you give me this amount. Well, if that amount, if their figure is more than what it's going to cost to evict them, well, then it became very clear, right? You evict them. So you're making a business decision here. Can I get this? Can I get possession of my property back for less than eviction? Get it back in a shorter period of time and get it back in a better condition. If cash for, and I'm willing to write that amount off and not go after them, that might be the better solution. It all depends. So again, you give your tenant this cash for keys agreement, and you also give them a W-9. Now they have to complete that prior to you having a cash for keys agreement date. And your tenant may give you some pushback and say, wait, why am I giving you a W-9? Are you going to report this as income? The answer is yes. You're going to write this, whatever your cash for keys amount is, you're going to write that off on your taxes. That would just make sense, right? It's a loss. And yes, that's income to a tenant. So they're going to have to pay tax on it. So you're going to need that W-9 with your cash for keys agreement. Where do you get a W-9? IRS.gov. You can pull that up. Where do you get a cash for keys agreement? You can pull them up online, or you can also get that through an attorney, but they're not too hard to find. Where I've seen some, my own personal experience is a lot of them, they're just real vague. And one thing that's absolutely critical when you have a cash for keys is not just define the date. Let's just say you're going to do a cash for keys next Thursday. Well, don't just put the date, put the time. You're going to do the cash for keys next Thursday at 3 p.m. And then explain to the tenant at 3 p.m., I'm going to be at that property with the locksmith. The house has to be completely empty and it has to be completely broom swept. You cannot have vandalized it. You cannot have taken any um, the attachments, any ceiling fans, anything attached to the property. You have to leave it in broom swept, clean condition. I'm going to give you the keys. You're going to give me, and I'm going to give you the check that we agreed to, and follow through with that. Well, let's just say that that time comes and the tenant is still in the property or they're still moving out. Well, then, it's a fail. That cash for keys was a fail. They get zero. You start with the eviction. As my numbers, typically when we call tenants and we say, do you want to do a cash for keys? About 70% of the time we get a yes. Typically, we come to an agreement about 70% of the time. Of those, about 90 to 95% do actually work. So it is extremely successful. If you look at the numbers of those that say, yes, we'll do an eviction, you're at a 90-95% success rate that it's going to work out. It's going to benefit you as a landlord. So that's kind of cash for keys in a nutshell. It's all about making a good decision. It's not always the right decision. It all depends on the circumstance and where you are with that. So I hope this information was helpful to you. If it was, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, as I want to be a resource to you. And I hope to find you, or I hope to see you on the next video. Thank you.